Okay, well, good morning everybody, and welcome to the new room. My name is David Worthington. I'm the director here at the chapel, and I'm going to be looking after you for most of today. I will be doing a short talk with you here in the chapel, sharing with you about John Wesley and his work and his ministry here in Bristol that began back in 1739. And you'll then get the opportunity to explore the rooms upstairs, where John and Charles and many of the early Methodist preachers spent time when they were here in the city of Bristol. And then you'll also be going over to the Charles Wesley House. Charles also has a very strong connection with the city, having lived here for over 20 years. So although we'll talk a lot about John here in this building, there will be opportunity to share about all things Charles in the house. So I hope that you're going to have an enjoyable day with us. You've brought the sunshine, which is lovely to see, and we also have lunch prepared for you a little later. So sounds like a plan, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I've been here in this role for about 13 years now, and how many years is it, Steve? Paul, you've been doing that? 10 or 11, right. So these guys are basically going to do the talk for me, or they're going to heckle me if I'm not getting it right, okay? So let's see. We'll get confusing for me to open my mouth, you know. Anyway, no, we've got to know Paul and Steve and Fred and Tom very well over the years. So just to get things straight out, I love all things Methodist heritage. My other great passion in life is baseball. So I have enjoyed visiting 24 of the 30 Major League ballparks. I haven't got to the Twins yet. Steve's going to host me in that one. But we have been to the Phillies ballpark, haven't we, Fred? We've done that one a couple of times.
Citizens Bank.
Yeah, well, they keep changing their names, don't they? With the sponsorship, I get lost these days.
We're going to the Tigers.
Name of Fenway just suits it every time.
We're going to the Tigers in August if you want to join us.
Tigers is the other one I've got to do as well, so yeah, we'll sort it out well. We're nearly there. Good, okay. Right. Let's have a chat about all things John Wesley, shall we, this morning? I think you'd like to do that, wouldn't you? So far you've been to Epworth and you've been to Oxford, and hopefully you've learned a little bit there about how that started, John and Charles, of course, in their respective lives. But I'm going to start in the year 1739, which I would like to respectfully suggest, and of course I realise I'm on fairly dangerous ground talking about revolution, but a good year for a revolution, 1739. Because it was in January of 1739 that their good friend from Oxford University, George Whitefield, first came to the city of Bristol. Whitefield, a name known to you guys, I'm hoping? Yeah. Whitefield was born in the city of Gloucester, about 30 miles north of us, and of course he got to know the Wesley brothers at the Holy Club at Oxford University, and he was here in the city of Bristol because he wanted to raise funds. He wanted to raise funds to go back to Savannah, Georgia, where he wanted an orphanage to be built. He'd originally started preaching what were known as charity sermons in Gloucester, and then come to Bristol to try and top up that fund. Why Bristol, I hear you cry?
By Bristol.
Thank you. I like a bit of interaction here, guys. Right? Why Bristol, I hear you cry? Why Bristol?
Why Bristol?
Why Bristol?
Okay, right, why Bristol? Bristol in the 18th century was the second city, second only to London. Bristol is a very significant city, it's a maritime city, it's a trading city. Much of its wealth was built on that trade, and that's one of the reasons I believe that Wesley and Whitefield and others, their ministry were heard, because there weren't just goods coming into Bristol, there were also thoughts and ideas as well that were being discussed and debated for the first time. So Whitefield manages to top up his funds, and then he's going to go back to Savannah. He writes to a number of his friends. John Wesley was not the first he approached to say, will you come to Bristol to continue this work that I have begun? All of them declined his invitation, and so he wrote to John. John's original response to George was, I still feel as though I have a ministry to return to America. Isn't that interesting? Given the fact that he rather left under a cloud, did he not, from Savannah, Georgia? Well, Whitefield then comes back and says, no, I want you to come and begin this work which I've begun here in the city. No, I want to return to Savannah. I want to preach to the savages, were John Wesley's words. To which Whitefield replies, John, you don't need to go all the way to America to preach to savages. There are plenty of them here in the city of Bristol. Well, I'm not a Bristolian by birth, so I don't get too offended by that comment. But the people he was making reference to were a group of miners in the Kingswood area of the city. Kingswood named after because it was the King's Wood. They were squatters on the land, eking out a living and behaving in a very unsociable way. And Whitfield originally and subsequently Wesley was one of the first people to go out and to share with them about the love that God had and the plan that he had for each and every one of them. If you can imagine this wonderful image of these miners working down the mines and coming up with these sooten faces, listening to these early Methodist preachers and responding in that emotional manner, and tears then beginning to roll down the cheeks and that street look that would be left. So you were a very brave person indeed to go out and engage with the Kingswood miners. It was said that when they used to come into the city, they'd come in en masse, and that soldiers who were based here in Bristol would retreat to their barracks. So fearful were they of the Kingswood miners. So you can see how brave these men were to go out and to start to preach in the way that they did. So John arrives at the end of March 1739. If you look in the journal entry for that day, the 31st of March, he talks about meeting with Mr. Whitfield, this strange way of preaching in the fields of which Mr. Whitfield set me an example. He also then goes on to say, and I think these are very significant words, he says, I would have thought the saving of souls almost a sin. And then he puts in bracket, till very lately, closes the bracket, I would have thought the saving of souls almost a sin if it had not been done in a church. So why was this man here to preach in the open air when he would have thought the saving of souls almost a sin if not being done in the church? That's John Wesley, the High Anglican. Well, he accompanies Whitfield on his preaching engagements around the city, and 2 days later at a site known as the Brickfields in Bread Street, he preaches in the open air for the very first time. Again, the journal entry for that day, he says, at 4 in the afternoon, I submitted to be more vile, to preach in the open air for the very first time. I just want you to remember those words, I submitted to be more vile. Well, according to Wesley's estimates, he preached to over 3,000 people. The population of Bristol at that time was around 50,000. Largest city in America was Philadelphia, with about 40,000. So you can see, are these preachers' estimates? I'm not going to get into that debate, but let's say John Wesley preached to 3,000 people. So this was the beginning of the ministry. Now, I would like to make the case that, of course, all of the factors that lead to that moment on the 2nd of April 1739, the time spent in Epworth, that methodical manner, that way in which, of course, the Holy Covered Oxford established itself, the lessons learned from being in Savannah, Georgia, all came together at that moment, the 2nd of April 1739. Well, we, of course, celebrate the 24th of May 1738, the heart being strangely warmed. When you are strangely warmed, what do? You enjoy the moment, yes? What happens when your heart catches on fire? You've got to do something about this, folks, yeah? And I think that's what happened to John Wesley, because from the 2nd of April 1739, his life was defined. He was the itinerant preacher. Just to give you an illustration at that point, of course, Wesley was beginning a ministry which many people, including the Kingswood miners, were responding to. However, in August of 1739, the Bishop of Bristol, no less, wrote to John Wesley, in which he says, Sir, why are you in my diocese? You have no commission to be here. My best advice to you, therefore, is to go. I'm pleased to say we have a better relationship with the bishop today than John had then. But John Wesley replies with these words, which I'm sure will be very familiar to you. I look upon all the world as my parish. How many buildings did John Wesley have associated with the Methodist movement in August of 1739 when he wrote that letter to the bishop? One. Which one?
This one.
This one. I'm going to say it again, folks, the oldest Methodist building in the world. So the work that Wesley has begun here is already attracting attention from the Bishop of Bristol. I look upon all the world as my parish. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have been in the room as the bishop read the letter, spluttering over his cup of tea, maybe? Who knows? Wesley goes on to write these words, which from a personal perspective I believe are of equal significance. He said this, he wrote this. This is the work which I know the Lord has called me to, and faithful am I in fulfilling what he has given me to do. This is the work which I know the Lord has called me to, and faithful am I in fulfilling what he has given me to do. Let's just go back to that statement. I submit to be more violent. Look at the contrast between April and August. If that's not a man whose heart is caught on fire, I don't know how you would define it otherwise. Well, of course, Wesley was engaged not just with the Kingswood miners, but also with religious societies that were meeting here in the city. Bristol has a strong history of nonconformity, with Quakers and Baptists as well as Methodists. And the story is that Wesley was engaged with a couple of religious societies meeting here in the city, in Baldwin Street and Nicholas Street, streets you can still walk down today. The story is so many people crowded into an upper room, the Bristol upper room, Tom, not the Nashville upper room.
Right.
Okay, yeah, just so we got clarification on that point. So many people in the upper room to listen to John that the floor collapsed. And amongst all of the chaos, Wesley says, we must build ourselves a new room. So a building that is 280 years old this year still goes by the title, The New Room. And I like that, because that's what it was built for. It was built as a place in which people could come and learn. It was a place in which people could come and spend time in prayer and Bible study. But it was also a place of action. So one of the first things that the Kingswood miners wanted for themselves and their children was access to education. So if you are involved in churches which offer any education facility, then you can trace your roots directly back to this building. This is the oldest Methodist schoolhouse in the world. As I'm sure many of you are aware, John Wesley had a lifelong interest in the use of herbs for medicinal purposes. The Primitive Physics book, I'm sure, will be familiar to some of you. And so Wesley offered free medicines. It was a dispensary. Again, I'm sure if any of you know time in hospital and doctor's surgeries, they're not always the quietest of places now, are they? Wesley also used it as a place in which he could speak out on social issues. He wrote the Thoughts Upon Slavery sermon in 1771. It was a subject that he regularly revisited here in Bristol. Bristol had built much of its wealth on the importation of tobacco and spirits and, of course, involvement in the slave trade. And in the year 1788, again, I'm just going to quiz you here, guys. How old was John Wesley in the year 1788?
He died in 91.
85. Anybody here at the age of 85 yet? Getting close, yeah. I might look it, but I know I'm not there yet. Okay, 85 years old. Nobody is at that age here. Can you imagine the courage to actually call a meeting in which you are going to say, I'm going to preach my Thoughts Upon Slavery sermon? Not just to a few folks gathered as we are here today. According to Wesley, over 1,000 people in this space. 1,000 people. Many of whom, of course, were set against what Wesley was preaching against, because for them, of course, their livelihoods depended on the continuation of the trade. If you look in the journal entry, John says that during the course of his preaching, a riot breaks out at the New Room. He was in fear for his life more than at any other time. And this was a man who'd done field preaching for over 50 years. He thought that, people had essentially been taken over by the devil. And yet within 6 minutes that whole commotion died back down. Wesley was then able to conclude his preaching, and in that sense, the work that he begins here in Bristol impacts upon names which I'm sure will be familiar to you. William Wilberforce was the British MP who eventually brought in the Slave Trade Act of 1807. The last letter John Wesley ever wrote is to Wilberforce to encourage him in his role as a Member of Parliament. Of course, he was also influential on John Newton, of course, who'd been involved in the trade, converts, becomes an Anglican minister and writes. Now, what's that hymn called again? Amazing Grace. There you go. So, in that sense, again, Wesley's work is having an impact on some of the names that we know so well. Right, I'm going to jump back to the year 1771. Why, I hear you cry?
Why?
Hey, you're 1771 was the year that the Methodist Conference was held here at the New Room, although there were 19 occasions on which it was held here, more than any other location in John Wesley's lifetime. But why 1771 is so significant for you guys is that a certain young preacher by the name of Francis Asbury attended his first ever Methodist conference. You're all familiar with Asbury, yeah? Okay. So, Francis Asbury, of course, who was already an itinerant Methodist preacher, had been based in various locations around England. attends his first ever Methodist conference in this room where you are this morning.
Wow.
Wesley, during the course of that conference, and you can read the minutes of the conference if you don't believe me, but these are the words. Our brethren in America call aloud for help. Who is willing to go over and serve? Asbury says, I made an offer of myself, and it was considered by Mr. Wesley and others that I had a call. I had a call. He arrives in Philadelphia, 1771, first preachers at St. George's. Wasn't so historic then, was it, Fred? When he arrived in 1771, there were 3,000 Methodists in America. When he died in 1816, there were 300,000 Methodists. That's a ministry, folks, isn't it? Yeah? To the point that there are two statues of Asbury, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe there are two statues of Francis Asbury in the United States. One is at the Drew University, Madison, New Jersey, where Fred is based. The other one is in Washington, D.C. at 16th and Mount Pleasant. Yeah?
Equestrian statues.
Equestrian statues. Thank you, Fred. Thank you for the qualification. Yeah. That was unveiled by President Coolidge in the 1920s with the words he deserved for rank as one of the builders of our nation. There is only one other statue of an Englishman in DC, and that's John Wesley at the Wesley Theological Seminary. And that is a copy
Of that one.
of that one. Yes, well done, sir. So the story behind that is that was erected in the 1920s. And at the end of the Second World War, we were approached and asked if we were willing to sell said statue. You guys do like to buy things.
Yes.
I have been to Lake Havasu and travelled across London Bridge. What a bargain you got. Right. Refocus. So, the agreement was that a copy of that statue could be made, and that is the copy that's at the Wesley Theological Seminary. Okay. Right, we're now going to fast forward to the year 1784, the year after the War of Independence. Or as we like to call it, the War of Traitors. No, we're all friends again now, aren't we? No, we're all friends.
Most people.
As I often say, I'm sure the Queen would be willing to listen to an application to join the Commonwealth if you choose to. No guarantees you will be accepted, but she is prepared to listen to your application and wish to make one. Better behaved cousins to the north, of course.
Yeah, right.
Okay, 1784. Right. And now an independent country, John Wesley goes to petition the Bishop of London, who at that time is still responsible for preachers in the colonies. He makes his case. More preachers are required, more people are heading over. The Bishop of London refuses his request, and so Wesley takes it upon himself to ordain 3 men here in Bristol at a site, number 6 Dycombe Street, not here at the New Room, but a private house. One of those men is Thomas Coke. Thomas Cook? Coke? Yeah. The father of Methodist missions. 2 others are Richard Watcote and Thomas Vasey. They also set sail from a little village just outside Bristol called Pill. We know Pill well, don't we, Fred? Yeah. And they set sail, go over the Atlantic, and of course arrive in America. First thing that he does is try and meet up with Asbury. He eventually traces him back to the Barras Chapel in Delaware. Anybody been to the Barras Chapel in Delaware? Lovely building, isn't it? Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, the first state in the Union, yeah? Good stuff. It has more than Perry Cramer to offer.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Barras Chapel, Delaware, they agreed to call a conference of preachers, which is then held at Lovely Lane in Baltimore over the Christmas period of 1784. And of course, from that date, you guys then trace yourself back. So, in that sense, I would like to make the case that with the greatest of respect to our audience here this morning, you can make the case for New York, you could make the case for Philadelphia, you could make the case maybe for Baltimore. But I would like to think that based on what I've shared with you, that actually the most significant city in the establishment of American Methodism is
right
Bristol.
here.
If anybody wants to argue the case, let's come and have a look. But I think the important thing is that the work that begins over there, of course, is work that then sees it get taken across, as you see the migration west, that then gets taken around the world. World Methodist Council, Lake Juneau, North Carolina, I'm very big on the website recently. How many Methodists are represented by the World Methodist Council? You're how many? Well, they're saying 75 million.
Oh.
75 million. Now, from a British perspective, that rather blows our minds, because of course that's even bigger than the population of the UK. Realise it's not quite as big as you guys in the US, but 75 million people who identify as Methodists around the world, basically tracing their roots back to this country, and I'm really going to push the envelope here, this city
This
and
spot.
this building. So there's a work to be done here, guys. Yeah? You're going to spend a day with us. You're going to spend a week or two in the UK, and then you're going to go back. Which states are represented here this morning? Minnesota,
Michigan.
Delaware,
Michigan.
Michigan, Louisiana, California. Right, okay. So I would say that's a good spread across the US, yeah? So what are you going to do when you get back, folks? You're going to tell the story. So the seeds that we plant here this morning are the seeds that are going to get taken to all different parts of the world. And they're going to be sown. And we hope they will bring good fruit. Yeah? Just a couple of quotes I would like to conclude, just to finish off this morning. I got the opportunity to go and speak at the Wesley Theological Seminary a few years ago. I had a great interest in American history. It was one of my majors at my degree in international politics. I took the opportunity to go to the National Archive in DC, as I'm sure some of you will have done in your time, and of course very heavy security. I'm sure it's much more difficult to steal the Declaration of Independence than Nicolas Cage made it look. Yeah? Or is the original actually in the souvenir store?
No.
Who knows? As you know, heavy security. But as you go out of that building, on the four corners of the block, there are plinths with statues and sayings. And one saying that I picked up in particular was from Wendell Phillips, who of course was an American abolitionist in the 19th century. And this is his quote. He said, "The heritage of the past," and this is a heritage building, folks, can't get away from that, 280 years old, that makes it heritage. "The heritage of the past is the seed that brings forth the harvest of the future." Doesn't say what sort of harvest it's going to be, but the heritage of the past is the seed that brings forth the harvest of the future. What was the sower required to do on the day? To go out and sow seed. He was not required to bring the sunshine and the rain and all the things that were going to produce the good fruit. There was an acknowledgement that not all of it would, but you have to go out and sow the seed. So John Wesley travelled over 250,000 miles on his horse during the course of his lifetime. He spent more time here at the New Room than anywhere else in the kingdom during that time. He understood. We've got to go out and we've got to sow that seed. And I would just want to go back to that quote, which from a personal perspective I found so interesting and I think sort of really motivating me in the work that I do, because in some respects this building could exist in splendid isolation. We're in the middle of the shopping area today. It wasn't always that way, it was commercial and residential buildings. How does this building not exist in splendid isolation? By opening its doors and doing a whole range of activity that we do. So when I came into the role 12 years ago, that was a glorified car park. That had a statue of Charles Wesley and not much else other than some grotty toilet facilities. So, back in 2011 we opened the garden, back in 2017 we opened those new facilities, including the cafe, the library, the archive, all of that stuff, okay? I did a speaking tour on the west coast of the US in May of 2017. I began my talks with "I bring you greetings" from the oldest Methodist building in the world. And the newest Methodist building in the world. I probably can't say that now, but I think for me that was important. And I go back to those words of John Wesley. "I look upon all the world as my parish." Wow, okay, that's a great phrase. You'll also see it on the statue in London. "The world is my parish." Very kind of our London friends to put a Bristol quote on it. Oh, I am naughty, aren't I? But I think those words I showed you a little earlier may be the words that I want you to leave with today. You know, this is the work which I know the Lord has called me to. Faithful am I in fulfilling what He's given me to do. John Wesley came to Bristol, I think, uncertain as to what his role in his ministry was to be. He'd spent time in Savannah, Georgia. That didn't work out. He came to Bristol unknowing, submitting to be more vile, to preach in the open air for the first time. Had no previous connection to the city. I'm sure he would have dusted off his sandals and moved away if he thought that the Bishops of Bristol was really saying, go, we don't want you here. And yet he stayed. And so there is a great work which John Wesley begins. There's a great work which the people of Bristol respond to. And that's why the World Methodist Council has 75 million members around the world today, because of work that begins in this building. So I'm not being disrespectful to any of the other sites that you're going to go and see. Please don't misunderstand me. But what I am saying is that I hope that the time you will spend in Bristol will bring you to the conclusion that John Wesley's heart was not just strangely warm, as it was in London. It did fire in Bristol.
Thank you.
I read that there was a prison nearby where people from Bristol would go and visit the prison.
Yes.
Whereabouts is that?
The Newgate prison is probably the one that you're referencing, which is about sort of 5-minute walk from us here. There's a big shopping area now, unsurprisingly, in that space. But yeah, the Newgate prison. Yeah.
The second question is, I read about there being a schoolhouse at the exactly that way over there for the education.
No, they would have used this same space. That space there, other than the access point into this space, was a mixture of that residential commercial building. So the Wesleys didn't have that space that we have today. So the archway where you see the Charles, that was created at the end of the Second World War. Just to explain folks, Bristol, like a number of British cities, London, Coventry, Plymouth, Portsmouth, etc., heavily bombed during the course of the war. Much of what we see in terms of around us today is modern architecture because of that bombing. There used to be a Methodist chapel literally next door to this that was torn down at the end of the war because of the damage. But I think, what did we say? One glass pane and one tile. Yeah. 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 So, you know, was the Lord protecting this building? We'd like to think so. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
The design of the pulpit and the nectar,
Yes.
was it very unique at the time? The pulpit on the top and that one? Or was it
I wouldn't say it's unique. These were later additions. We have to remember that this was built as a meeting house. So these were later additions. So the lower pulpit they would use for the reading of the Bible and leading worship. The upper pulpit reserved exclusively for the preacher. So all those of you who've had your photograph taken in that upper pulpit this morning, that's great. But you must now preach, okay? You must now preach. And the other thing to say, when you go up to the museum, do take a look from this window here, this octagonal window, because John Wesley would stand at that window to listen and to watch the preachers. Class meetings began here at the New Room. I mean, you know, I just haven't got enough time to tell you all the first that began here in Bristol, but class meetings began. And many of those who then went on to become itinerant preachers essentially got their training here in Bristol. So one of the ways in which Wesley tested whether you were ready to go out was he would stand at that window to listen and to watch. Can you imagine, folks, you know, your superintendent or bishop or whoever stood there, you know? Are you ready? Are you ready to go? Yeah? Yes.
Was the pulpit and lectern here during John's lifetime?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And the communion table and rail as well. But these were later additions. Wesley initially encouraged people to go to local Anglican churches to take communion. There's a famous story where Charles takes a group of Kingswood miners to the Temple Church, and they are refused entry, so they come here to the new room. So the communion table and rail was put in. It's actually an 18th century table that John Wesley himself used to serve communion at. But we do stress it's the Lord's table and not John Wesley's table. But yeah, we don't have a worshiping congregation here on a Sunday, but we do have a Friday lunchtime service, so we have local ministers who come in and take communion, and we extend a welcome to all who want to come. We're probably the only church in Methodism that's actually seeing an increase in numbers at the moment. Maybe that's something to think about, folks. If you are in city centre ministry, maybe you might want to open your doors on another day other than a Sunday. See who comes in. Yeah.
I know I read that there were no windows because of the riot or by the protesters.
Yes.
How, can you tell us a story a little more of that?
Sure, okay. I don't want to explain our work, but you're right?
We're
you still
here.
comfortable enough in
We're
the pews?
fine.
Yeah, okay. These, of course, are not original Wesleyan pews, you understand that. They were put in the 20th century to look like Victorian pews. What they're doing in a Georgian building, I have no idea. You want a free souvenir, folks? They're yours. Okay.
Put them back on the
You
plane.
see, I keep laughing, but it's true, I want them to go. I just want them to go. Right, yes. So the building was designed by a Quaker called George Tully. And you're absolutely right, that there are no windows here on the ground floor. It offers a degree of protection to the building. So instead we have the light coming in from the balcony sections. And my favourite feature, we talk about ourselves being the lantern in the city, the octagonal window here. Just a little quick story to share with you. One of the ways in which tax was calculated in the 18th century was based on the number of windows you had in your property. Those of you who went to Bath yesterday afternoon might have seen the Georgian building with outlines for doors or windows which had actually never been put in because the owner of the property, their financial situation didn't improve in the way that they were hoping. So the Bristol tax authorities said to Mr. Wesley, you will pay 8 amounts of tax. It's an octagonal window. John Wesley said, no, it's a single continuous window that goes all the way around. I'm only going to pay 1 amount of tax. I believe it was a certain gentleman by the name of Benjamin Franklin. There are only 2 things certain in life. One is death, the other is taxes. Well, John Wesley won the argument. Only paid 1 amount of tax on the window. In terms of the 2 courtyards, the original entrance was from 1739, the horse fair. That's why our postal address remains the horse fair to this day, but not that open courtyard that you see today. Instead, there was a narrow alley that ran along the side and came in through the back of the building this way. Wesley, with his work, was then able to purchase a piece of land which allowed an access from 1748, but again didn't have the garden, it was just that single pathway through. But in that sense, we often have people today saying, oh, we struggle to find you. It's just like, well, we're more open today than we were in the 18th century. But of course, we're a Grade 1 listed building. To my knowledge, we are the only Grade 1 listed building in the Methodist Church. And so I don't have the option, or for that matter, the budget to spend on advertising in the way that these multinational retailers are. I can't compete with Primark, I can't compete with these guys, but we do our best to try and make folks welcome. But in terms of the architecture, I think it's a great example. Any of you who know sort of architectural guide by Pesner, is that a name known to some of you maybe, Pesner? He talked very complimentary about the inside of the building, loved the inside of the building. Thought the outside was a little dull, but he liked the inside. Anything else?
So David, the pews they're an abomination that need to go. We're not. So are these benches more likely something that would have originally been the seating in this place?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, these are fixed down today, but you would essentially have a flexible use of space. We might think we've got all the best ideas. Actually, let's build a sanctuary and let's have a nice flexible use of the seating arrangement. Wesley was thinking about this in the 18th century. So why are they still here today?
I just posted on my Facebook the other day a thought of why our churches that we built today are so much less accessible than churches built 800 years ago, or in this case, this church.
Of all the cathedrals around the UK today, there is only one which still has pews in. One. So why does this do it? Sorry, we're thinking on Satan. The only other thing I would just like to share with you, just to give you that sort of moment to reflect on, the clock. The clock was a gift from John to the new room to encourage good timekeeping. You will notice it is not placed at the back of the building where only the preacher can see it. It's here for all to see. John Wesley would not preach these long sermons that went on for hours. They're relatively short. Many of the people who came to listen, of course, were working people, and therefore they didn't have the time to spend listening to it for too long. But one of the beautiful things that I love, when we have a moment of quiet, is that ticking clock. You'll hear it. It's the same ticking clock
Wow.
that John and Charles heard when they were here at the Now, if that doesn't sound, at the back of your spine here, folks,
Yeah.
just a moment here, yeah. That's the clock that John and Charles Wesley heard ticking. And you're hearing it tick today. Yes is the answer to that question. But they didn't stay here to listen to a ticking clock. They went out. Yeah? Like you're going to